Good morning, guys. It is currently 5:30 in the morning on a Saturday. I'm on my first cup of coffee, and I feel like telling a story. I don't know why I chose today to tell this story. I'm a little bit tired, but I got a thought on my mind, and the thought on my mind today is going to be domestic violence. I've had some stuff on the channel kind of briefly touch on it. I've made some comments on social media where I've said things like, coming toe to toe with a domestic abuser and wanting to punch him in the face, or I don't know, things like that. And I've seen a lot of comments, and I get this a lot from people out on the street. Typically speaking, this is when like a man calls the police and accuses his spouse or his female half, whatever, of domestic violence. And we arrive on scene. We don't find any evidence of an assault. We tell the guy, hey, look, we're going to take a report. We're going to refer you down to the prosecutor's office. These men typically get really upset, and they say, oh, if she called and accused me, I'd be hauled off in cuffs. And this comes into the conversation of, do police ever arrest women for domestic violence? This, that, and the other thing. The fact of the matter is, yes, we do arrest women for domestic violence. And I might tell a story about arresting women for domestic violence here at the end, because I have a story about the first time that I ever arrested a woman for domestic violence. So it does happen, and it is not uncommon. But the fact of the matter is that traditionally speaking, men are much more likely to be the perpetrators of domestic violence. And there's a variety of reasons for that. I read a book, it's probably about 2 years ago now. I'll find a cover of it and I'll put it up on the screen behind me. It was a book called Why Does He Do That? And it was a case study on domestic violence perpetrators. And the person who wrote this book was a licensed counselor, and their area of focus was they actually did like group therapy and individual therapy for men who had been ordered into therapy by the courts as part of their domestic violence convictions. And one of the overwhelming themes of the book, or one of the overwhelming sources of domestic violence in men, and the book was actually about domestic abuse, which domestic abuse often escalates into domestic violence. But one of the overarching themes of it is that the reason that men are more likely to be domestic violence abusers is because it's a control thing. There's a certain thing that occurs in a certain proportion of men that they believe their role in life is to absolutely control and dominate women. These are the men that often become domestic violence abusers. And I think one of the reasons for this is because men typically have a more dominant type A personality, and women have more of a support. People get triggered when you say words like submissive, but I think that is the proper term. You might feel more comfortable saying supportive. Like, I have a wife who is very supportive, but I don't believe she's submissive. She typically agrees with the decisions that I make and the direction I would like our family to go. She's very supportive in my decisions, but she's not completely submissive, where she absolutely makes her thoughts known. And I make sure that when I'm making decisions for our family, I am very heavily taking into consideration her wants and needs. So when I make a decision for our family, it's generally speaking something that she would want to do anyway. And she tends to agree with me when I make those decisions. But there's a lot of men out there, unfortunately, that don't really care about the wants and needs of their spouse. And they actually kind of get off on doing the opposite of what their spouse wants. And as they start to do this, they realize that they're hurting their spouse. They're making their spouse feel weaker, spouse, whatever, significant other. And this makes them feel powerful. One of the problems with that is that the initial act, it might have been something really silly. Like they know that their wife is cooking dinner, and they stop at a fast food restaurant on the way home and eat instead. And then when they get home, they're not going to eat what their wife ate. And that makes them feel powerful because they took control of that situation. They get a little bit of a high from that. And then as time goes on, they do that multiple times over, and the high that they get from it kind of wears off. It's very similar to drug addiction. So then they escalate whatever it was that what they did. You know, instead of just going to a fast food restaurant, they might go out to a bar and stay out all night long. You know, and they kind of get off on the pain that they're causing their significant other, and that eventually escalates to yelling and screaming. And then when that yelling and screaming, you know, when that woman becomes completely submissive and docile and cowers from them, then it escalates into like physical force. That's not like an all-encompassing explanation, but that is something that is very common in domestic violence. And I usually tell people that domestic violence is not about anger. It's not about physically hurting somebody. It's about completely dominating them not sociologically, psychologically. It's about psychological domination and making that person feel insignificant. And these weak men that like to do that to people, the reason they do it is because they're actually weak. And they want to make other people around them feel very small. That makes them feel powerful because they're actually not very powerful in the rest of their life. And these men are, they're also, generally speaking, they're very smooth talkers, very charismatic people. And they're very good at talking their way out of things. That's how they get into these situations with these women. And it's these women often are in that situation where it's like, you know, you put if you drop a frog into a boiling water, the frog's going to jump out. But if you put a frog into a pot of cool water and then you slowly turn up the heat, the frog's not going to realize that the water's getting too hot until it's too late, and then they're dead. That's the situation that a lot of these women find themselves in when they're in a long-term domestic violence relationship. But regardless of that, I have arrested many women for domestic violence over the years. And when women commit domestic violence, it's usually a little bit different. There's absolutely those women that like to control and dominate men. Like, that's a stereotype. It's a stereotype for a reason. Those women exist. I have not found that those women do that, or that the women that are dominant over men like that are domestic violence abusers. The women that I have arrested for domestic violence are usually more of an outburst situation. Or, and it does, fear and control does come into it, but generally speaking, the ones that I've seen, it's been like a short-term emotional outburst that led to a physical altercation. I do have one. This is the very first woman that I ever arrested for domestic violence. And I'll always remember it because it was a little bit strange. It didn't actually fit into the categories that I just kind of labeled. This was a situation where I was on probation. I was a brand new officer. I'd only been on the street for 6 months or less. And I was working a very affluent part of town. This is a part of town that is very exclusive. There are very expensive restaurants in this part of town. The houses are extremely expensive. I'm talking close to $1 million for a house that is 1,200 square feet. These are like New York real estate type prices. This is an extremely affluent part of town. And my partner and I got dispatched to this house on a call about a domestic disturbance or an argument. We get there, we have a male and a female. The male seems completely reasonable. The female did not seem reasonable. And the male was saying, look, she's threatening me, all this other stuff. I don't know what to do. And then we pulled the woman aside. She was a school teacher and she was articulate, clean. Their house was in order. This wasn't the situation that I normally find myself in. And it just seemed like a petty argument. So what we ended up telling them was just go to separate rooms for the night. You know, it was two people living in like a 3-bedroom house. They had separate bedrooms, or they had a room and a guest room. We made them agree to spend the night in opposite rooms. So they go to separate rooms, we leave. We got called back there again. When we got called back there again, it was, you know, this petty argument kind of stuff where the male half was calling in saying, hey, look, I went to the spare bedroom. I was minding my own business, watching TV. She came in, she started yelling at me, started throwing things at me. I can't do this. And that's when we told the guy, we're like, listen, she hasn't physically assaulted you. She hasn't physically harmed you. This is just harassment. You guys are having an argument. If you can't figure this out and you can't cohabitate, maybe one of you should leave for the night. You know, we don't tell one person or the other person to leave. We generally, when I do it, I talk to both people, and I encourage both of them to leave. Hopefully one of them will. But regardless of the fact, it had not risen to a level of a criminal offense. It was just two people arguing. Sorry, I'm still not awake. Two people arguing, and kind of it is what it is. My hands were tied. But the female half was becoming more and more unreasonable. I did notice that. Then we were dispatched to that same house a third time later on the night. It was probably 2 or 3 in the morning at that point. We get there and we go and talk to the male half, and he's like, yeah, I was laying in bed, minding my own business, doing exactly what you told me to do. And then she comes into my room with a pair of scissors, woke me up, and she was standing over me with these scissors saying, I'm going to effing kill you, and all this other stuff. So we took his statements, which, if in the state of Ohio, we have domestic violence threats, aggravating menacing. Domestic violence, aggravated menacing it's actually just called domestic violence threats in the ORC. So that is a criminal offense. Cause another person to believe that you were going to, cause or attempt to cause another family or household member to believe that you are going to cause serious physical harm, and that harm is imminent. So standing over somebody with a pair of scissors, telling them you're going to stab them is enough to cause a person to believe that they're about to receive some serious physical bodily harm. And then that threat is imminent because you were standing over them with a pair of scissors. So we went into the other room. We're talking to the female, and she admitted to everything. She's like, yeah, I told him I was going to stab him. I'm just so mad. I'm so frustrated. He's lazy. He never picks up after himself, blah, blah, blah. She had all of these excuses in the world. At that point in time, we're like, okay, fine. You're under arrest. We slapped the cuffs on her. This was a very affluent young woman who was a school teacher. And then she started screaming at me, I'm a school teacher. I'm going to lose my job. And, this, that, and the other thing. It's one of those situations, too, where we get blamed for ruining people's lives when we were there 2 other times in the night trying to help them prevent their life from being ruined. I'm not the one that picked up the pair of scissors, went into my husband's room, and threatened to kill him. But that's what she did. It was a weird one because these are not the type of people that I would suspect of being involved in a domestic violence relationship. And I don't really know what was going through her head at the time. Maybe she suffers from some sort of mental illness. And if she did, hopefully she gets treated. I'm willing to bet that they're still together this day. And I'm also willing to bet that she's still doing this kind of activity. I don't know. But regardless of the fact, those are my thoughts on domestic violence and the story of the first time I arrested a woman for domestic violence. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you later.